20th century in the United States of America, hundreds and hundreds of teenage boys and girls are becoming hopeless dope addicts every year. It's fantastic.
Welcome to the Pretty Girl Pill Club, where consistency would be key if not for my oppositionally defiant nature. I'm Soph, and this is Rohnie, and this is a show where a couple of very unqualified idiots on the internet with fucked up brain chemistry talk about having fucked up brain chemistry, among other things. How's it going, Rohnie?
It's pretty good. Well, no. That's the default answer. It's going.
That's a lie. That's a social construct that we have to always say, fine. Because no one wants to know the truth.
Right. You know, I actually had a mini I get Kanye now because I had a mini manic episode the other day.
Ooh, fun. I did see a cryptic tweet about manic episodes, and I was like, oh shit.
Yeah, I was just laying in bed and it was like 3:00 and I was like, my body is tired, but my brain's like, nah, we got to worry about this. So that's fun. And that was basically my Wednesday, if today is Thursday.
Today is Thursday. Jesus. Nice car alarm. Oh shit, I forgot, you're back in LA.
Yeah. You know, it's actually kind of funny. I've been telling Christian this. I don't know if I ever told you about my neighbor that's very loud, but he's going through it too. The other day I heard him on a phone call having a mental breakdown.
Oh, fun.
It's funny because he's like very loud. He's always yelling. Yesterday he was actually yelling about how much he didn't like Scarlet Witch, which would be fine from the Avengers Marvel.
Oh,
extended,
right.
Yeah, and
I'm an uncultured swine. I'm sorry.
So he was just yelling about how he wasn't a fan of her, which would have been fine if he wasn't like yelling. The parts he was yelling of the conversation was like, she needs to be stabbed. I want to see her die in the worst way. And I'm like, fuck, man, you can't yell that on a Wednesday night.
Damn. Welcome back to LA, where you can yell that on a Wednesday night.
So that was yesterday, and the day, like one of the days before that, he was like, you know, full on crying on the phone. And it was also funny because he has a dog, and his dog be barking, and
well, as we've talked about before, like our animals they inherit all the shit that's wrong with us.
100%.
And so that dog is like a projection of like that man's mental instability.
I think the funniest thing for me was when the dog was barking and he was like, Rusty, I already told you about this, being too loud. And I was just thinking like, maybe Rusty's mad at you for being too loud.
Yeah, maybe you're the problem. Don't blame it on the dog. The dog is just a product of the environment that you've provided it.
Like the dog really wants you to lower your voice. Because whoever he's talking to, I feel like it's an in-person conversation and I only hear him, never hear anybody else.
It's kind of a weird thing, but I unironically really love LA for the reason that everybody is just so fucking nuts and everybody's like going through some shit at all times. Like not even just like because it's 2020, but just because like living here is so fucking hard sometimes.
Yeah.
And like everybody's a little nuts. Like if you live here, you're probably a little bit nuts. Hence why I'm here and hence why Ronnie's here. And I don't know, I just love like the little slice of life that you see sometimes because like, I don't know, like it's such a trope, but like you see people like on the freeway just like crying all the time. It's like a thing that I've seen in this city more than any other city I've ever been to in my life. But I love that. I love that about LA. I love that like it has this image of being like so pristine and sparkly. But like I always describe LA as like a flat Perrier that's like been in the backseat of your car for like 6 months in the middle of summer. Like that's what LA is to me. Like it's a Perrier that's lost its sparkle. And like once you see past that veneer, it's just like so unabashedly, I don't know, disheartening, sad, melancholy, that's probably the word. It's so unabashedly melancholy, but juxtaposed with like scenery that would suggest otherwise.
Right.
This is like the art school dropout in me that like is really going in hard on that. But I don't know. There's something about that I just really love about this like stupid, awful, wonderful place.
One thing I will say, so was a famous artist named Felix Gonzalez Torres, and he created a lot of work. Apparently he worked on movies too. I guess the punctum of all his work is that his partner was dying from AIDS, because this was like the height of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. And his partner's name was Ross, and he lived on Rossmore, which is like down the street from me. And for him, that was such like an important street, because as he's like losing his time with Ross, he just wanted more Ross, Rossmore. He wanted Rossmore.
See, that's the shit that like the 15-year-old Sophie that wanted to go to film school inside of me like fucking loves. That shit's great.
Yeah, I tear up when I pass it, because he lived in the Ravenswood apartment, and I'm like, damn, that's that's real, like just the dwindling clock for him. And like, I don't know, because he had his own dwindling clock, because he had HIV too, I think. Time is a resource.
Time is a resource that I'm not using very well right now. Well, anyway, that was a really like lighthearted and uplifting way to start this episode. So today on the docket, we're talking about something that I just recently learned about, and I have to credit the Sad Boys podcast for this idea, because I fully ripped them off. Not really. This was just like a side tangent that they had that I was like, oh my god, that's a thing I need to research and talk about. Both hosts, I believe, have ADHD, and one of them was talking about how his doctor recommended that he check out a white paper about rejection sensitive dysphoria and how it relates to ADHD, because his doctor had a suspicion that that's what he was experiencing. And I was like, I've never heard of that before. Like, no one has ever mentioned that to me. But apparently, it's a super, super common part of ADHD. You could say a symptom or a byproduct of it. And it goes hand in hand with the sort of emotional dysregulation that is often associated with ADHD. So a little bit of an overview, if this is like completely, you have no idea about any of this. The ADHD brain has a hard time regulating emotion because it struggles to distinguish between dangerous threats and minor problems. So the way that like we have a hard time prioritizing our time, maybe it's more important that you do this one really big project, but you're gonna spend a bunch of time on little, smaller, inconsequential projects first, even though that makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of the same thing with emotions. So because ADHD, obviously hyperactive, it means that most people with ADHD never experience peace, which I can 100% relate to. And our minds are going, 100 miles an hour, and we're often left totally exhausted just because of like the emotional weight of existing is so much sometimes.
Yep.
I think everybody can relate to that one a little bit.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Rejection sensitive dysphoria. Most people who have ADHD are also very sensitive to what other people think or say about them, and this is sometimes called rejection sensitive dysphoria. Dysphoria comes from the Greek word that means hard to bear, which I thought was interesting because, I don't know, did you know the definition of dysphoria? Like, or did you just know what it meant based on context of just like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for me it was a context thing, because like I've heard the phrase body that thing where you look in the mirror and you be like, my body doesn't look, I'm like, you think you're like 600 pounds, but you're not.
Is that body dysmorphia or body dysphoria?
I think that might be dysmorphia. I don't know what I'm talking about.
But actually, no, you're right, though, because I think it still comes from the same root word, right?
Yeah, because I saw dysphoria, and they
it's
kind
all
of
the same.
Yeah, in the Google, like when they put words are hard today. When they put like the problem that somebody's experiencing, and they had dysphoria in there, and basically dysphoria is like how you see your body, but how it isn't. So like you're making it up in your mind.
Yeah, because I think, again, like I said, this might not make any sense to other people, but I just never thought about what the word dysphoria actually means. And so learning that it comes from the Greek word that means hard to bear, I was like, oh, that, like, it just, I don't know, it clicked for me. And I was like, okay, that makes perfect sense. So people who have RSD or experience RSD don't handle rejection well, and they get very upset if they think someone has shunned or criticized them, even if that's not the case. So all of this is going to be cited in the sources for the episode, but this came from a white paper on emotional regulation and ADHD. But up to 90% of teens and adults with ADHD are more sensitive than usual to rejection, and nearly 1 in 3 say it's the hardest part of living with ADHD. For me, I would not say it's the hardest part of living with ADHD. I feel like I experience this, but maybe I'm not fully aware of it, but I definitely experience this. And the sort of like physical side effects that they describe with RSD, I can 100% relate to, especially embarrassment. Like even just thinking about something embarrassing I've done or said in the past will like cause my body physical pain. So I completely relate to that, but I don't know that it's the hardest part for me personally. That to me is like less of a burden than just like the general not being able to keep my shit together, just like in life and work and stuff. But the emotional dysregulation is real. So people who have the condition sometimes work hard to make everyone like and admire them, or they might stop trying and stay out of any situation where they might get hurt. I feel that one.
I felt that.
Big one. The social withdrawal can look like social phobia, which is a serious fear of being embarrassed in public. So yeah, I don't think I have social anxiety, but but a small degree of social phobia I can relate to, because it does feel like a lot to go out and be in the world. Even if it's just like going out to get my mail or something, or walking down the street to 7-Eleven, like that feels like a lot to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously RSD can affect relationships with family, friends, romantic partners. The belief that you're being rejected can turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy where you act differently toward the person you think has rejected you, and they may begin to do so for real. But I do definitely relate to this one a lot, because if I think that somebody has a problem with me, or they've rejected me, or they don't like me, I do this sort of overcompensatory thing where, I don't know, I just do very like ridiculous and slightly irrational things that in my like petty mind makes sense or like is a way to get back at them, but it never actually works. So yes, my behavior definitely does change in that I become less and less socially inept, and my behavior gets more and more petty.
Mm-hmm.
People with RSD may experience the following: be easily embarrassed, get very angry or have an emotional outburst when they feel like someone has hurt or rejected them, set high standards for themselves that they can't often meet. That's me to a T. Have low self-esteem, feel anxious, especially in social settings, have problems with relationships. We have fully established my problems with relationships in the last like 4 episodes, I think. Stay away from social situations and withdraw from other people. Yeah, I think we've also fully established that one for me. Feel like a failure because I haven't lived up to other people's expectations. Yes, but I feel like a failure because I haven't lived up to my expectations. But also, it's less of other people's expectations, but more society at large's expectations. I don't think anybody in my personal life, or anybody in my life in general, I can't think of somebody who like specifically sets unreasonably high expectations for me. I think most of the people in my life, I feel like, give me too much credit.
Mm-hmm.
And I also do think a lot about what other people think of me, even though I really love to pretend like I don't. And sometimes think about hurting themselves, which is obviously on the more extreme end of things.
Right.
Which I haven't really personally dealt with.
It sounds like I might have RSD.
Yeah.
Either that or no, it's either that or I just have all the symptoms.
Yeah, but what's interesting about RSD is that some of these symptoms are also common in other mental conditions, and RSD can be confused with bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, depression, and social phobia. What's interesting about this is that they also say that people with ADHD who experience a high degree of rejection sensitive dysphoria are often misdiagnosed as one of these things rather than ADHD. So if you experience a high degree of RSD and you go to a psychiatrist, if those symptoms are just such an overwhelming part of your ADHD presentation, you might only get diagnosed with something like depression or bipolar. So that's kind of the complicated thing with RSD, because depending on how it manifests for each individual, you can be very easily misdiagnosed and potentially mismedicated. And that's also why like ADHD is so much more fascinating than I ever realized it was before getting diagnosed, because I didn't realize how much it encompasses and like how many things about yourself and about your life that it can complicate or affect. Because when I first got diagnosed, my belief about ADHD was that it was just an insufficiency of dopamine in the brain, which in short it is, but it's just like, I don't know, it's fascinating to me how a deficiency of one chemical in your brain, like how many things it impacts in your life. Like it's fucking nuts. And so something that I think is important about recognizing all of the aspects of your life that it affects is that a lot of people with ADHD get diagnosed pretty young, and then they just get prescribed Adderall and they're good to go. And then they never go any further with it. But then if that's what you do, then you're only tackling a very small part of the problem. Your inability to sit down and get your shit done is such a small part of what living with ADHD is. And there is so much ongoing work that you have to do when you have ADHD. Whereas sometimes I think we oversimplify it, and a lot of people who, again, get diagnosed young, they just, slap some Adderall on it like a Band-Aid and send you on your way and never do the follow-up work of working through the other things that you're going to experience, like emotional dysregulation and rejection sensitive dysphoria and depression and social phobia and all of these other things.
Right.
So one of the biggest problems for people with ADHD is emotional dysregulation. And a lot of the time that manifests as emotional outbursts or a lot of problems with anger, which I can relate to. I was a very angry kid. Mm. And even still, I mellowed out as I got older, but it took until I actually started taking antidepressants and was properly medicated across the board that this sort of like ridiculous, irrational outburst of rage went away. And funny story about that, last December, I was momentarily switched to Wellbutrin. So Wellbutrin is actually a norepinephrine, I can never say that fucking word, dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So it's an NDRI, so it's different from an SSRI. So it also controls the dopamine reuptake in the brain. Because of the way that it affects dopamine in the brain, it just gave me like terrible stim rage. Like if you've ever, I don't know, like coke rage. It basically gave me coke rage.
Right.
I experienced the worst bouts of rage that I had felt since I was like a really, really young child. And it was honestly frightening. And I've told the story before, but it ended in me yelling at a lot of people, hurting a lot of people close to me, and quitting my job. So it was a nightmare overall. So with RSD, if this emotional response is internalized, it looks like an instantaneous but triggered major depression. Most psychiatrists are trained to see depression and totally miss the ADHD. It is often mistaken for rapid cycling bipolar or borderline personality disorder due to the interpersonal nature of the catastrophic emotional response. If the response is externalized, it manifests as a rage at the person or situation that wounded the person so severely. And then what I thought was so fucking interesting about this is 50% of people who are court mandated for anger management treatment have previously unrecognized ADHD.
That's interesting.
Does that blow your mind the way that it blew my mind?
Kind of. I'm thinking about it in the context of King of the Hill when they put him, they put Hank in anger management, but that makes a lot of sense.
I just thought that was like so crazy. Like that's insane. And that speaks to kind of a larger issue with how undiagnosed or misdiagnosed mental illnesses or disorders like impact society at large. 50% of people who are sentenced to court mandated anger management. So if all of those people had been diagnosed with ADHD and were seeing a therapist regularly, like would they maybe not have ended up in a situation where they had to go to court mandated anger management? I don't know, but it's possible.
Yeah, most likely.
Even if it reduced the number of people who ended up in that situation by like half or a third, Like, that would be insane. You know, you think about the amount of money that is pumped into the prison industrial complex, but if some of that money was instead reallocated to giving everybody access to affordable or free mental health care, like, it would balance out, which I don't think is a hot take at all. But like, hearing that statistic really cemented in my mind how much that makes sense.
That's why we got to defund the police, because I mean, there are a lot of, you know, problems that affect somebody's mental health, and like even homelessness, and the solution to it is, you know, better allocation of funds for like mental health and like people's well-being that this country doesn't prioritize, especially in LA, where the LAPD has a massive budget. They also have a massive budget in like coffers, I guess, for handling situations where police officers are sued. The LAPD has like money to either settle or pay off the court fees. Yeah.
No, people always talk about how like Scientology has so much money they could sue anybody into oblivion if they wanted. No, that's not even it. That's like a cover-up story. I mean, it's true, but it's not nearly as true as the LAPD has so much money and they could bury anybody they want to in lawsuits if they so chose.
Absolutely.
Like the LAPD is as bad, if not worse, than Scientology.
Definitely worse than Scientology.
Oh, no. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. They're about on par, I would say.
I mean, Scientology locks people up.
They beat people. They send them to like these weird like compounds where, I mean, they basically enslave people.
Which is the same as the prison industrial complex and the police.
Exactly. Which is what I was going to get to. So I would say like Scientology and the LAPD have a lot in common. Which, doesn't the LAPD have like some sort of like under the table like thing with Scientology? There's like some conspiracy about that.
It wouldn't surprise me if like Scientology was like paying them off.
They definitely, oh yeah, that's what it was. I'm almost certain that that's a conspiracy, but I believe to be a fact. I don't have a source for that, but I'm just gonna say it. Allegedly. Don't sue me. But dude, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, Scientology and the LAPD are definitely in bed together, and it makes a lot of sense. They have a lot in common. Well, and then what I was going to say before, not only that, yeah, LA has a huge homelessness problem, and we have a huge policing problem. And those two things combined are working against the overall mental health and mental well-being of the city and the people who live here. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of cities, but I think it's extremely prevalent in Los Angeles.
Yeah, definitely. Because, I mean, there have been situations where, like, police departments, there's, like, one situation in Antelope Valley, I think, where a police department was sued so much that they had to stop being a department for a minute.
Right.
And that's not a bad thing because we're paying taxes and these funds are getting allocated towards this, like, big, you know, riot machine, essentially. And that leaves a lot of people out in the dust. Like, even like, you know, schools don't have money. We're, you know, struggling to like test people for COVID. I mean, there's like a lot of things going on that would be fixed by defunding the police. But that might be another conversation.
Like we said last week, it all goes back to the patriarchy and capitalism and heteronormativity and straight men. Like that's the problem. And like all roads lead back to those things being the problem.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there are a lot of like societal implications for this stuff. And that's why it's so important. And that's why we advocate for talking about it more than we currently do. Because, I mean, this affects government at every level. It affects society at every level. And it affects the individual at every level.
And I think on a social and personal level, I'm bringing up queer theory again because queer theory is really good at looking at the ways that the system is set up and how that affects people through intersections. And like one thing that's really interesting is like our sense of self-censorship, which like we can see it more clearly in the creation of queer art that is often censored for being too sexual, or, you know, one thing about censorship is if you feel like you can't describe it, then it should be censored. So that kind of is in the art world, but it also, we internalize it when we are forcing ourselves to align with the system that's in play. And I think like one example of it is we can see it in like internalized biphobia, where you have somebody who is attracted to men and women, but like if they're a man, say, and they have this internalized biphobia, then the capitalist biological clock that says you need to get married, have children, and be a productive member of society so that they can be a productive member of society makes you go, okay, well, you have to prioritize procreation. So you start censoring that part of yourself. And like, that's something that we can observe. But then like for a lot of people, we do self-censor ourselves. And so when it comes to like rejection, if somebody is like rejecting you, then you want to go, like I felt this where it's like, okay, well, if I like this person and they don't like me back, then it's like, okay, well, I actually don't like them. And then you kind of do over censorship in yourself to like say, well, why am I attracted to this person? I shouldn't be attracted to any aspect of this person. And I'm going to like shove that part down. And then it kind of extends to in like feelings about yourself, where if you feel you don't deserve something because there's something about you that doesn't exactly fall in line with what you want, then you kind of have to destroy a part of yourself to fit into that mold. Even if you're not actively like in that mold, you're destroying yourself just to fit in.
Yeah, internalized biphobia is really interesting. I mean, like, obviously, like, I'm a straight person, so I can't speak to that. But, I mean, we all remember, like, the mid to late 2000s and the early 2010s where, like, it was such a normalized and, like, grotesque joke to be like, oh, like, people who are bi are just confused or whatever.
Right, yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, and that, like, girls who are bi are just slutty and, like, all of that bullshit. I mean, it makes sense. Again, like, I personally can't speak to it, but I remember growing up with a lot of those things being shoved down my throat, not by, like, my family, but by media.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically of, I think there's an episode of MTV's True Life from, like, I don't know, it had to have been, like, early 2000s, early 2010s. That was like MTV's True Life, I'm bisexual. And the whole like storyline of the episode being about like cheating on her boyfriend. Or like whether or not they were bi or just gay, or like they were bi or just a slut. Like I distinctly remember that. Yeah, I don't know. Basically what I'm saying is like that messaging was just like so pervasive and still is to a degree. I think it's like getting better now, but I think a lot of us grew up with that.
Definitely. But what kind of it does is, you know, when it like shoves you into this box, it forces you to like shave off part of yourself, which just, I think the biggest result of that is like, you know, you don't want to communicate with anybody. You don't want to go outside. You kind of want to stay away from society.
Right. And it turns into social phobia, or it can turn into social phobia.
The over censorship of ourselves really does affect how we move through the world and how we like communicate with people. I guess it's just like that we internalize the censorship so much.
People are constantly telling you that you're all of these things. Like, for instance, the MTV's True Life episode that I'm thinking of. You know, after a while, you're getting told that, oh, you're a slut, you're just confused, or you're just actually gay. Like, there's no such thing as bi, you're just gay or confused. All of that, you start to believe that stuff about yourself, and then you start, again, like, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You start to do those things. Like, if you believe that you're a hopeless loser, like, you're gonna do things that perpetuate that.
Yeah.
Even if that wasn't initially the case.
Yeah, that's actually another thing that is coming to mind. For people with low income, they're often seen as like, you know, they have like a lot of kids. They're on drugs.
Yeah.
You know, they can't keep money, all these things.
Yeah.
And
yeah, spoiler alert, rich people are on drugs
exactly.
way more than poor people. I don't know that for a fact, like statistically, but like, come on.
Yeah, they be skiing, but every day. So what happens is when you are in this low income situation, you will exhibit what people call risky behavior. And like sometimes that's like, you know, you're having like a lot of unprotected sex, so you can for like a evolutionary trait to keep on your legacy or you know, whatever. And or you're like doing drugs to like take your mind off of the hardships of just not having money. And people like look at you funny, but that's like a social regulation that you're trying to fit in with everybody else who has money, that you just want to be okay. And so like the whole thing is like you're just trying to be okay with yourself. But there's like some aspect that's wrong with you when we look at intersectionality. Like, you know, when you're talking about the true life thing, no one ever calls like a bi guy a slut, really. That's just like that's something that they levy against women.
All roads lead back to the patriarchy and toxic masculinity.
Right. And so it's like if you're low income and you're like a person of color, it's like, well, that's what you're supposed to be in. And like, especially as like a black person, it's like, okay, well, you're low income and you want to, you know, smoke weed here and there to get away from the pain of being alive.
Right.
And it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy that like, it's like, oh, everybody who doesn't have money is having hella babies and on drugs. But it's like it's a reaction to the social censorship of your own identity. Because these intersections like exist in like race, gender, income, body ability. I mean, there's a lot.
But there's kind of like a stereotype where people will often conflate not having money with being uneducated. And I think sometimes when people want to say, you know, describe a class of people as poor and uneducated, what they really want to say is poor and stupid. Mm-hmm. That they're just not as smart or they're not as good as people with money. And that's also, you know, very much a racism thing too. The belief that brown and black people are not as intelligent as white people. But what's interesting about that is there was a study that Stephen Dubner cited in either the second Freakonomics book or on his podcast, I don't remember which, about how you would perform on an IQ test relative to your income. But what they figured out is that basically it's not having a low IQ that makes you broke. It's being broke that makes you have a lower IQ. So when you don't have money, your mental faculties are underperforming because you're so preoccupied with all of the stress, anxiety, and depression and everything else that comes along with being in a disadvantaged socioeconomic position. We know that a lot of kids that underperform in school, the reason that they're underperforming is because their home life. It's because they're poor, or maybe they're at school and they haven't eaten since, you know, the Monday before or whatever. I mean, we talk a lot about how like summer break negatively impacts poor kids because sometimes that free meal that they get at school is the only meal that they're going to have that day. So yeah, you're not going to think, and therefore you're not going to perform academically or intellectually as high as you would if you weren't preoccupied with all of those other stressors. So it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. It's like, no, it's not being dumb that makes you poor. It's being poor that makes you not dumb, but like makes you, it impairs your mental faculties.
I mean, I've experienced this where I got the best grades I've ever gotten in college this past summer quarter because this was like the first time in 6 years that I hadn't had to worry about money. And so for every other quarter of college I've had, I've wilded it out because it's like, I don't have money. I can't finish this final, you know?
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that too. And I will say the most focused and the most, not necessarily the best grades I ever got in school, but definitely the most on top of things and focused I ever was in my academic career was when I lived on campus my first year of college. Obviously, my family was having a hard time paying for that, but I didn't really know about that. I mean, I did to a degree, but it was all being taken care of, and it wasn't my problem, or it wasn't my problem at the time. Eventually, I will have to pay those loans back. Or, you know, we could abolish student debt. That would be cool. But that was the most focused and the most on top of things and the most together I ever was in my academic career. And I ended up doing very well. And I think it's because for the first time in my life, I had a very stable place to go home to. I had access to the dining hall where I could eat as much as I wanted. I was never hungry, and I never felt unsafe. And that was something that I had never really experienced before.
Right.
Like, when I got home from school, I wasn't going to have a fight with my mom. And when I got home from school, you know, there was always going to be anything I could dream of to eat. And I think why a lot of university, I mean, I don't know, UCLA is probably this way too. Like, a lot of schools will really advocate for people living on campus, primarily because they make a lot of money off of people living on campus. But one of the more valid reasons that they advocate for people living on campus, or why a lot of schools require people to live on campus the first year, is because living on campus, in my experience, truly does help your academic performance, because it's such a sheltered, safe environment where, like, you're fed and you're housed, and everything is being paid for by either your parents or the government or future you. And, you know, obviously, like, you're a freshman in college, you're not thinking about the loans that you're going to be paying off 10 years from now. So it is the safest I had ever felt in my life, and the most stable I had ever felt. And that's definitely why. And so I would assume that there is a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, so UCLA just wants money. They don't care about people's mental health.
Yeah, no, I know that. Like, but I think, like, at its core, you know, the money thing aside, there is, like, factual and I believe statistical evidence to show that, like, people who live on campus during college do perform better overall academically.
Well, I feel like most people see, like, college as, like, a way to get away from their family.
Yeah, but living on campus, it's not like, okay, if you're 18 and living on campus, like, if you think that you're independent by living in a dorm, you're not.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely felt
You're not.
that. I just remember
you're honestly more sheltered and more, like, looked after than a lot of people were by their parents. And that was the truth in my case. Like, somebody was going to come after me if I was, like, smoking weed in my dorm, which wouldn't have happened, like, at my parents' house. Not that smoking weed is a problem, but that's just the first example that came to my mind.
I got the opposite of that. One time me and Christian brought one of his frat brothers over, and we, like, smoked in my room when my roommate went home, and he was, like, the good roommate, I guess. And it was funny. I remember, like, running through the halls with OZM because everyone was like, it smells like weed right next to your door, bro.
Oh my God, yeah, that was in my first quarter of college at Western. My roommate was a total fucking stoner, and I ended up hating her and moving into a different building by the end of that quarter. But yeah, we were constantly getting in trouble for her smoking weed in our room. And I would often, like, take part of the responsibility for that, even though I wasn't really smoking weed, or I was, like, pretending, like, to be a stoner, but I wasn't actually. But it was always her. And I was, like, constantly, like, taking part of the fall for her, which was so many levels of terrible. Also, funny story, I think it was either, like, the first or second month of school. I don't remember what we did, but we went and got really drunk, us and, like, a bunch of our friends. And we go back to our dorm, and one of our very drunk friends, who actually grew up, like, in the Midwest with, like, super, super fucking Christian parents, like, was very sheltered. Like, this was probably his, like, first time getting so incredibly drunk. He ended up not breaking our window, but breaking the screen in our window.
Nice.
Then the next day, my roommate let our RA know so that we could get it replaced. Like, she thought, like, she didn't think that we could get in trouble for this. Like, she thought, like, oh, like, the way that, like, you know, if you live in an apartment and something gets broken, like, you tell your landlord and they come and fix it, right? Like, that's what we were thinking. And our RA comes, and then we end up getting in trouble for the screen being broken.
That's kind of whack, but I guess...
No, it's fucking whack. No, it's so fucking whack. The other problem, we were so naive that we told the complete truth of how the screen broke.
Yeah.
Which was so stupid. I can't remember if I did or she did. Or maybe we both did. I can't remember what I said, to be perfectly honest. I think I kind of, like, shifted some of the blame and said that, like, my roommate had friends over and one of them broke the screen and I didn't see it happen, but I know who did it. And so we both ended up getting in trouble. We had to go to some sort of, like, university sanctioned class about, like, I don't remember what it was. It was, like, taking responsibility and, like, not partying. I don't know. It was something stupid. And everybody that was in that, like, stupid fucking, like, class with us was a complete fucking degenerate. Like, I remember one girl, like, she was so fucking dumb. Like, the person giving the class was asking, like, why did you do what you did to get into this position? And this one girl was like, why did I do it? Well, I wanted to, like, get drunk with my friends and have fun. I was like, that was probably not the right thing to say, Brittany. That actually was her name. Her name was actually Brittany. I remember this vividly. And then we had to write a 5-page single-spaced essay about why what we did was wrong and how we will behave differently in the future.
Wow, now that is whack as hell.
No, it was so fucking whack. I wrote that whole essay in like 15 minutes and emailed it to my resident director, and she emailed me back within like 10 minutes and was like, got it, thanks, you're checked off for like having fulfilled your sentence or whatever the fuck. And I was like, bitch, you didn't even fucking read that. Which, it's good that she didn't read it because, like I said at the opening, I am oppositionally defiant by nature, and I was so fucking pissed off about this that the whole essay was about how... the whole essay was satirical, basically. I wrote about how guilt by association is a totally valid, like, way to persecute people, and, but it was, like, completely satirical. I was, like, totally shitting on the whole thing. Oh my god, I'm sure there's like a Google Drive that exists out there somewhere that has that essay in it, and I wish to fucking god I knew where it was, because I know it was like the snarkiest 5 pages of text ever written. But yeah, dude, I don't remember where that started and how we got here. Oh, right, living on campus. The point of that is that, yeah, that was the only time in my like teenagerhood that I ever had to be like sneaky and like try to get away with shit. Like, I never got punished as a kid. Like, the punishments that I got for my behavior were my own like fucked up mental state.
And I think like if you take all those instances of like you getting in trouble or like not being able to fulfill your duties as a student, the next logical step for your brain is to be like, I'm dumb because I can't do college. Because that's how I feel.
It taught me to be sneakier and to also lie when you get asked what happened. It taught me to lie and it taught me to be sneaky. That's what that whole experience taught me.
I had a situation where I came back to my dorm and I was like drunk, but it wasn't like a bad drunk. I like was just walking up to the dorm, and we had the key cards that you push against the thing to open the door.
Yeah.
And so drunk me's like, I bet I could throw my wallet and hit the thing and the door would open.
Oh my god, wait, I think I remember this. Yeah.
I did that and I like missed, and I'm like, what was I thinking? So I go to pick it up, and like one of the RAs from my floor, I guess, or like not even my floor, was like, hey, why'd you throw your wallet? And I was like, I was trying to open the door.
Because I'm 18 and I'm fucking stupid. Like, what more of an explanation do you want for that?
And they started like asking me questions. They were like, okay, well, what's your name? Where do you live? And I was like, and I just ran. And then I waited for them to like walk away, and I just like walked back in. That shit was dumb. Yeah. I just wanted to see if I could open the door remotely.
I always had, at my school, because it was Western, our like student ID numbers were called W numbers. And I had a fake W number memorized that I would give out anytime an RA asked for it.
Ooh, that's good. That's good.
I did that a lot. I would always just be like, oh, I don't have my ID on me. Here's my W number. Because some of them were smart enough to ask for your ID card and not just your W number. But I would just lie and say I didn't have it on me so that I could give them a fake one.
Do you still remember the W number?
No, I don't. I don't even remember my real one. I know I still have my ID card because I use it to scam stores into giving me discounts.
Right. And for me, like all 6 years of college, kind of just were situations similar to that made me feel like I'm dumb. And so I was really internalizing that. Yeah. And I think like that's like one of the reasons why I don't like reading.
Well, I felt that way in high school because, as we've talked about before, Christian and I went to a really like ridiculous high school that had insanely high standards for students, but to a level that like it wasn't so much teaching you to be like intellectually curious, it was teaching you to be a workhorse, really. It wasn't a private school, it was a charter school, but it was basically a college prep school where they would just overload you with so much work that like, I mean, kids were so fucking stressed out at that school. So when I got to college, I got kind of a chip on my shoulder after the first year because I like I thought college was like easy compared to my high school experience. So I got a little bit like full of myself because I thought everybody in my classes was a complete fucking idiot and I was so much smarter than them. Because I mean, to a degree I probably was, and a lot of them were really stupid. Because I had been like so traumatized by high school, I was like, "Oh, this is no big fucking deal. All of these people are degenerates. I'm better than them." But yeah, I mean, having undiagnosed ADHD for the majority of my schooling and also undiagnosed dyslexia for a lot of it too, I always felt stupid. And I've talked about this before as well with dyslexia, that I mean, I never sought out the diagnosis until like much later because my assumption was there's nothing wrong with my brain or like my neurochemistry. What's wrong with me is that I'm stupid.
Yeah, you internalize it.
Yeah, so I did internalize it, and I always felt like a piece of shit. And so I kind of had this bit of an armor up where I had to constantly act like I didn't care. And like I always pretended like everything was effortless to me. And I think I still do to a degree in different aspects of my life. Like if I go on a date or something and someone tells me that I look good, I never want them to think that I put effort into how I look. Actually, no, across the board, I never want anybody to think that I put effort into my appearance, which is like a super common like heteronormative girl thing, but I totally feel that way. And I never want people to think that things are hard for me, especially as an adult. I get really embarrassed about financial stuff. I don't want people to know if I'm having a hard time financially. I mean, more recently I've been more like, haha, fuck my life, like being unemployed fucking sucks. And that's me really coping with all of the shame that I feel about it. But going through like elementary, middle, and high school, I constantly lied about my family and home life situation because I just didn't want people to know the truth. And I wanted people to have like a very specific perception of me.
And I think that perception has to deal with like aligning with the idea of like a functional adult. And so it's kind of interesting to talk about RSD as like, you know, if some situation is happening to you, you react in this way. And it seems like a lot of the situations that could be happening to you are like the effects of society beating you down.
Yeah.
Because like for women, like society is beating y'all down everywhere.
Yeah.
Like literally in every aspect.
Yeah.
So that's like the RSD right there. You know, even if you don't have ADHD, you're probably going to experience those symptoms from people telling you this is what you are. And then you have to go like, oh yeah, well, if society says I'm this, then I am this. And then you kind of just lean into that.
Right. And I definitely feel that. And so I think everybody can relate to this, even if you don't have ADHD, because like the white paper that I'm citing says, like, these are super common symptoms for other mental health conditions. And even if you don't have one of these mental health conditions, you know, we all experience anxiety to a degree. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have anxiety. So I think everybody experiences these symptoms to a degree. It's the intensity of that experience that kind of dictates whether or not it's related to a mental disorder or not.
We are all struggling against capitalism.
We are all struggling against capitalism. Rohnie and I just took a 5-minute break so I could run my AC because it's 100 degrees in here. And I tried to find that study about being poor making you depressed and dumb, and can't find it, but I'm going to keep looking.
I think we're case studies of that.
Oh, no, we are case studies. Yeah, but I just want to cite a source and, pretend to be professional, Rohnie. But yeah, I am a case study. I definitely feel like a lot of my mood is tied to my bank account for sure, and how good I feel career-wise, which right now, not great at all.
Yeah, my job got pushed back, so I guess I have slightly more free time, but I don't want that. I want money.
Yeah, like free time is great if you're not broke. It's like people who say that money can't buy happiness. Like, fuck you. That's a thing that only people with money say. Because sure, you can be rich and depressed, but if you're rich and depressed, at least you're not depressed because you can't pay your water bill or your rent or eat. So fuck off. I don't care.
I have a quote, well, 2 quotes from 2 problematic figures. The first from Hitchcock.
You're good with those problematic figure quotes.
Oh yeah, the progressive subversive character. I don't know, but so Hitchcock in Psycho, he didn't write it, but there's like one point where this really rich dude is like, money can't buy happiness, but it can buy off unhappiness.
Oh, yeah.
And then Kanye loves to say,
I mean, that's basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, Kanye says, money isn't everything, but not having it is.
What song is that from? It's from
Good Life.
Good Life. That's right. I could picture the album cover, so I was definitely right. Thank you, Kanye.
And in the vein of like, in the vein of being dumb, my parents have 2 children, and I'm supposed to be the smart one, but such is not the case. My sister definitely, she's in grad school now, so it's like if you were to look at it like that, you would think she's the smarter of the 2. But
well, gender might be a construct, but women are smarter.
No, I'm not making this a gender statement. I'm making this a me and my sister statement.
You didn't make it a gender statement. I made it a gender statement because I just wanted to be like, yeah, well, men are dumb and women are smart. I'm saying that ironically, but like...
Well, see, that's the thing. In that statement,
statistically
yes.
speaking, I'm not wrong. Anyway.
I think a lot of my unintelligence comes from my masculinity.
It's the way that like having a penis like impairs your mental capabilities. There's a correlation there.
My sister was able to matriculate without problems, and I'm over here like, I'm sad and depressed, and I can't getting a C in a class. That's impossible, you know?
Yeah, being depressed makes you dumb. So that study that I'm thinking of, or maybe it was like Stephen Dubner's interpretation based on this study, was that being depressed makes you dumb, being poor makes you depressed. Therefore, being poor makes you dumb and depressed. And I definitely feel that way. And that's why a lot of kids with ADHD sort of struggle with feeling stupid or feeling inferior to their classmates. It's because ADHD is so often correlated with depression. I mean, if you have ADHD, I can't remember what the number is. I'm almost certain I have it written down in another episode outline somewhere, but there is some crazy statistic about an overwhelmingly high percentage of people with ADHD also have another diagnosable mental health disorder. So if you have ADHD, you probably have depression also. Or if you have ADHD, you probably also have anxiety. Or you have all 3 and you're just a trifecta of fun. So it's not the ADHD that's making you quote unquote dumb. You're not dumb. People with ADHD are by and large smarter than people who don't have ADHD. The issue, or part of the issue, is more so that the depression that comes along with ADHD is making you dumb.
Right. I think there's also like a identity aspect too, because you're like at a crossroads. If you're like struggling to, I don't know, do normal things, then you kind of you have 2 choices. Like they say LGBTQ youth are like more likely to turn to drugs because
when we were on our break, and sorry to interrupt you, but when we were on our break and I was like looking for that study I've been referencing, I did run into a bunch of articles about kids with ADHD being more likely to turn to substance abuse, and also depressed kids that didn't perform well in school being more likely to turn to drugs.
Right. And so we look at the intersections again, and it's like if it's almost like if you're not white, you're more likely to do drugs to feel better in a society that caters to white people. Or if, you're like hysteria was an identity issue that was levied against women because like the patriarchy is saying like you have to be like this, you have to be that, and then like the boxes that they're being placed in left them not being human, like they weren't treated as people.
Right. And
that like identity issue, just it's hard to deal with in yourself. And so like the other option of it is to like just push it down, then like push whatever part of your identity is not a white cis straight male with money.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole because I do want to do an entire episode about ADHD and substance abuse. But because of the nature of ADHD and how it affects your brain, particularly dopamine, people who have ADHD are significantly more likely to abuse drugs, are significantly more likely to smoke, have issues with alcohol, all of those things.
Yeah, people got to seek out the comfort just to live in this fucked up world, and they'll get it from wherever they can.
So one study I have queued up for our ADHD and substance abuse episode that we're going to do in the future is 46% of children with ADHD were daily smokers by the age of 17 versus 24% of age mates without ADHD. I mean, and then you have to think about all of the undiagnosed cases of ADHD, particularly in girls. Girls are far less likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. A lot of women are diagnosed late. I'm one of them because of the way that it presents in women, but not necessarily, and not that it has to do with the biology of being female. It's definitely like how you're conditioned to behave in the world as a female.
Yep.
Whereas boys will more often get diagnosed very early with ADHD, usually because they're acting out in some way, because that hyperactivity. Men have the confidence to act out that way, whereas girls, they're young girls with ADHD are just as hyperactive, but the way that they've been conditioned to behave in the world, that hyperactivity is more internal than external.
A really good societal look at things, I don't know if that's a sentence, but like horror films are really good at showing how a society thinks. And then so sometimes like we have the idea of the other, which is usually like the antagonist of the horror film. A good example of it is in The Exorcist, where we have like a pubescent girl getting possessed by the devil. The thing is, like, when she's possessed by the devil, she like takes on these like very masculine traits. And that's where like the problem comes in. And you'll see that in like a lot of horror movies where like women are the villains, that like they'll be they'll be like masculinized in their like behavior, and like we're conditioned to see that as like, oh, that's like a weird woman because she's acting like a man, like there's something wrong with her, you know?
Yeah, or it's like it's Satan. It's not just like a woman displaying more aggressive traits. Yeah. And so that like societal conditioning has huge impacts on whether or not people get diagnosed with ADHD at a young age. And, you know, looking back, I am very grateful, or not grateful, but I am okay with having been diagnosed really late, because I think going through all those years of schooling, having to struggle so hard, did teach me a lot, and it built a lot of character. And while I much would have rather had been diagnosed and treated and would have had a much easier time, I think that like being diagnosed late did build up a lot of the character that I need to progress into being an adult with ADHD rather than just a kid with ADHD. When I read all of these studies about the rates at which girls are diagnosed versus boys, it makes so much sense, because it's like, yeah, a boy might act out in class, and then that's why he gets recommended to get an evaluation for ADHD, whereas a girl might feel all of those same emotions, but they'll internalize it and they'll bury it and like turn it on themselves. So, I mean, there were plenty of times in elementary school when I wanted to act out, or I would get angry and want to do something fucked up, but I didn't, because I'm a girl and I need to be quiet and polite. And maybe if I had acted out, I would have been diagnosed earlier. But but I was really just acting out on myself in my mind. Interestingly enough,
As a semi-adult, every time I've had like a really bad mental breakdown, the police have been involved. And it was actually kind of funny because I was watching this video of this like woman, she wasn't wearing a mask, and so like a security guard came and like she was struggling to handcuff her and take her away because she was just like sitting there. And I thought back to like one time when I was just like roaming the streets of Westwood, like stark raving mad, and like how like cops just like walked out and like arrested me, no problem. And I was like sitting there kind of like mentally in the back of my head, like, I can't fight a cop. But also there was like,
yeah,
you know, I was also like, I want to fight the cop though. So the point was that I was handcuffed without issue, because I knew that if I wilded out a little too much, even in that like,
I mean,
heightened
not
state,
to get dark, but
yeah, no, I would have died.
It could cost you your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. The response to a person of color having a breakdown is to immediately go down the criminal route. They're doing something criminal, not they're crying for help, or like this is a cry for help.
Right.
Whereas, what is the response to white people doing the same thing? Depending on the situation, it could be the same, or it could very well be, oh, let's help this person. Let's figure out why they're doing this. For a person of color, they don't care why you're doing it. They just care that you're doing it and you're being Black in public, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I've seen too many videos of like white people being able to like easily evade cops. Like there are videos where like a Black person's like running from cops and they're like, you know, like a mile, not a mile. They're like significantly farther ahead from the cops, so the cops not going to catch them. But like you have situations where it's like white people getting arrested and it's like they're right next to each other and there's still like an inability to control this person because of the way that they're like reacting to them.
It's that white man gusto.
Yeah.
It's that white man gusto. That's what it is. I actually had a thought the other day. I was watching a live stream by somebody called Deadwing Dork. He's really hilarious. If you're into live streams and like weird internet culture, you'd probably love him. He's super fucking funny. He does these live streams where he basically just like looks at dumpster fires on the internet and laughs at them. And it's like, it's a lot of fun and it's very cathartic for me. But he did one recently where he was watching a bunch of videos of, do you know about like those insane white people that are into the whole like sovereign citizen thing? Yeah, okay. So he was watching a bunch of compilation videos of quote unquote sovereign citizens getting pulled over and like the way that they would interact with the police. And so many times during that stream, Deadwing Dork and also me and everybody in the chat was like, dude, only a white person can pull this whole sovereign citizen bullshit. Like some of these like videos of these traffic stops are like 20-30 minutes long. And like if that quote unquote sovereign citizen was a person of color, like that traffic stop would have been 5 minutes and they would have been dead. Because it's just like the amount of like confidence that they're behaving with, it's just like so absurd. It's so absurd. God, if you've never watched a compilation video of quote unquote sovereign citizens getting pulled over by the police, funniest fucking thing you've ever seen. I mean, white privilege literally is being able to get into a screaming match with a police officer about how you're a sovereign citizen and the laws don't apply to you.
Or like how you don't want to wear a mask.
No, and like that whole ideology about like sovereign citizenship and stuff, it is very much like tied in with the whole anti-mask thing. And overall, like all of these things have their roots in like far right, super libertarian ideology that's like super like I'm not going to go there, but you know what I'm trying to say. And it all amounts to white privilege.
I got some ideas on libertarianism, but I will also not go there.
Hey, I mean, you can go there if you want.
I will say it's interesting. This dude, Ken Levine, he has the game series BioShock. And in the first two games, like you're in a setting where the city is made by somebody who is following liberal or libertarian ideas and is saying like you shouldn't have to give your money to the government or you shouldn't have to give your money to God or like if you make it, it's yours. Like you should be able to keep it. And like throughout the course of the game, you see like this individualism that like Ayn Rand was like preaching in Atlas Shrugged. That's also the game is based off of Atlas Shrugged too.
Right. Yeah.
And so that like individualism is like a diet form of fascism.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's almost like if you're... Because they're like usually with individualism, there's like people who are doing well in the society, but then there are also people who need help. And then those people are seen as parasites and they must be like eradicated.
Precisely. And their whole like perception of the world exists in a vacuum in which brown and black people and the plights that they go through don't exist.
Yep.
And so libertarianism only makes sense if you also believe that racial injustice, gender inequality, and all of these other things don't exist.
Right.
So it's purely like a white thing. And so again, like a lot of, if you go, I don't know, is it alt-libertarianism or something, or like the alt-right equivalent to libertarians?
Neoliberalism. Or no, yeah, you're right, alt-libertarian.
That's not a real phrase. I just made that up on the spot. But basically like the alt-right equivalent to a libertarian being the sovereign citizen, quote unquote, which is, in my mind, it is having a level of white privilege to where you feel comfortable and confident getting into a screaming match with a police officer when you've been pulled over and not thinking that your life is going to be in danger because of your actions.
Right. Yeah, I had a roommate who didn't, I had a lot of, I had some white passing roommates who didn't understand that. And it was just like, I mean, like, and they're not gonna, they're not really gonna befall any of those issues because they look white or they are from the model minority.
What do you mean by the model minority? I want to hear your definition of that.
So this might put me in some hot water, but I gotta be honest. So,
well, yeah, I think we're thinking the same thing, but I want you to say it first.
Yeah. So the idea of the model minority usually applies to like people of Asian descent because they are perceived as like being smart and being like conservative in like values, and like, you're not going to expect like an Asian person to like, be the cause of why there are police on your street, or like if there's like a public disturbance, it's not like an Asian person causing the disturbance. And so I had an instance like this in class where we were talking about Get Out. Yeah. And we were discussing like neoliberalism and how neoliberalism kind of pushes aside, like it's almost like it's born out of a post-racial America, in quote post-racial, that like these actual things that like Black people are going to aren't going to apply to like people who are Asian. And so in the class, there was an East Asian person and then a South Asian person, and they were talking about how hard school was for them because everybody thought they were smart. And I was like, so like I had to turn my camera off because I didn't want to like, give them a look. But it's like, if people thought that I was smart, I'd be okay with that. Like there's never an issue where someone was like, oh, you're so smart. But like, even for me, when I first got into UCLA, this like white woman asked me like, oh, are you on the basketball team? And I'm like, I am the basketball. Like, how am I supposed to be on the team? For
people listening who don't know, Rohnie is a short motherfucker. I'm sorry. You're a short king. You really are.
I'm like 5'4". I tell people I'm 5'6".
Like, in what universe would Rohnie be on a basketball team other than the fact that he's Black?
Unless I had the spirit of Muggsy Bogues. So.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. They were like really getting up on that. And I guess I'll tell on myself now because, we're being honest. I had a situation where I was in a lab and my lab partner was Korean. And I, in my head, I was like, okay, cool. We're going to do all these labs, no problem. Like, he'll probably do all the work. And I ended up doing all the work because this dude didn't know what he was doing. And maybe he could have kind of been like playing me. And if he was playing me, all right, kudos to him. He got me to do all the work. But
he taught you an important lesson, though, whether it was purposeful or not, because we can all call back to a time where we've made an assumption like that, because a lot of racism is not conscious. A lot of it is subconscious, right? Because we're conditioned to have all of these beliefs.
But the thing with the model minority is like, it's kind of people think of it as a myth, like that it's like not real, but there's like a lot of truth to it.
Yeah, and this might be fucked up, but I feel like, because you kind of already alluded to it, like the girl you were saying who said that school is really hard for her because everybody thinks that they're smart. I feel like people who actually do fit into that, like Asian Americans and other like quote unquote model minorities, would love to tout the invalidity of the model minority idea.
Mm-hmm. And like nobody's a monolith too.
Exactly. And I'm not speaking, I should probably rephrase that, but I'm sure a lot of people who fit into that stereotype of the quote-unquote model minority probably resent the idea of the model minority because they feel like, well, I'm also a minority. Why are my plights less valid? And they're not less valid, but in a conversation about racial inequality, I don't know that the most poignant thing to bring up is how you feel like school is hard for you because everybody thinks you're smart. I'm not even downplaying or backtracking. Like, I'm sure that's a very real thing for her, and I can understand where that would be a problem, like being in a group project and everybody expecting you to do all of the work.
Right, yeah.
But like everybody's problems are still problems, right? The severity of your problems is relative to your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'll send you an article about it if I can find it. But what the article alludes to is what I kind of like to call the victim Olympics, where it's fashionable to be oppressed. Like everybody wants to be oppressed because it, in our way of trying to like break capitalism, we're actually not doing anything new by flipping it on its head and like saying like, oh, fuck white men, fuck straight cis white men. And if you're not one of those people, then you're good because you're oppressed.
Well, they want to have that card. They want to have that card, right?
Yeah.
They want to be able, like, I think what you're kind of getting to is, especially with like colorism and stuff, people like a white passing minority still wants to be able to pull out the minority card when it's convenient for them, but they don't have to do that when it's inconvenient for them. Whereas, like, if you're not white passing, that's not a card you get to just, like, put in your wallet and bring it out when it's convenient, because there's no way to hide that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an option for you. I hope I'm not, like, completely talking out of my ass, but it's just, like...
No, that's what it is.
I think we, especially in the past, like, couple of episodes, we've been making a lot of jokes about, like, oh, fuck white people and the patriarchy and blah, blah, blah. I don't want people to feel like, because you're white or cisgender or whatever, that your problems are invalid. Everybody's problems are still problems. Everybody's problems and plights and grievances are still valid. But you also need to have enough self-awareness and enough social awareness to understand why it's not relevant to certain conversations.
Yeah. And like bringing it back to queer theory, after the Stonewall uprising in like 69, that like the 70s was like a time when like white queer folks were actually able to like assimilate into society very well because they were white. And so like today you kind of see that. I see that all the time on Twitter, where white people are waving their queer banner as a source of oppression, which it's not that queer people are not oppressed. Like queer people are oppressed, but there's like, with the intersectionality, you're able to move through that oppression with greater ease if you are white.
Yeah, and if you're cisgender also, or if you are passing in your gender presentation.
Right. And like, so all those things work almost in the same way. And it's like, well, I have it hard because I'm from this historically marginalized group and everybody wants to be special.
If you have, like, being able to pull it out only when it's convenient for you is a privilege.
Yeah.
Because there are people who, by no fault of their own and not by their own choice, they have to wear it on their sleeve because it's undeniable, because there's no way to hide the fact. There's no way to hide their identity. Whereas if you're a cisgender, gay, white man, you can walk into a room and no one has to know about your sexual identity. They might just assume that you're a straight white guy like all of the other straight white guys. And so you can exist in these spaces and move through these spaces in a way that's different from people whose gender presentation doesn't fall into that. And
we are making progress in being more tolerant, the key word, not accepting, tolerant of, I guess, the other in society, which is, everybody else. But you
can't fight fire with fire.
Right.
And so your response to being oppressed can't be to then oppress others. And I think of things like, I think I talked about this before, but my issue with, like, if you don't know what I look like, I'm a very thin, short, petite girl. And so, any issues or insecurities that I have with my body are less valid than that of an overweight or obese person, because I'm thin, so I have thin privilege. And I'm not denying that thin privilege is a thing, but to say that because you're thin that you can't be insecure about your body, or that nothing is wrong with your body and that anything that you feel negatively towards yourself and your body is therefore invalid is fucked up. I think it's Lizzo who has like something, has some like lyric in a song about like, oh, fuck all these like skinny bitches or whatever. And I'm sure there's like a lot of songs that have like a line similar to that.
Yeah.
Like, you're being a hypocrite, right? You don't want to be ostracized for your body, so you're ostracizing other people for their bodies because of that. And I could get into a whole discussion about how I think like the whole fat positivity thing is like super toxic and like not at all what body positivity should be about, but I'm not going to go there right now. And I'm sure I've like gone on this rant before, but it pisses me off because for me, in my experience, like I struggle with being able to maintain a healthy weight. And a lot of my mental health issues do get worse when I'm not like eating correctly and all these things. So I do have a lot of issues with my body, but not in the same way that an overweight or an obese person does. But it doesn't mean that the issues that I'm having with my body and my health are less valid because I'm thin.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not jumping into the victim Olympics on this one, but there's a quote from PhD Dr. Umar, who's like, he was like beefing with somebody. And I guess I should preface it by saying I saw this tweet where a woman was saying like, she was outlining how, you know, it's not like sometimes you'll see on Tinder where somebody will be like, no short people, or, you know, they'll like not like as a man, they'll not want to get with you because you're short. And
right.
Dr. Umar was like beefing with somebody, and he was kind of enforcing that with like saying like, cause he's bigger. And so he was like, I could lose the gut, but you'll never be 6'3". And
fuck,
I like
that hurts. That cuts deep.
I like chuckle whenever I like think about that, because it's like I'll like apply it to myself of like I'll never be 6'3", which like what the person in the tweet was saying was that like it is a product of like kind of the powers that be, and that like tall men are supposed to be like protectors and like make women think that they need to have a protector, and so like as a result, women will be like, okay, well, I don't want to be with a short man because he's not like big enough, you know, and obviously you're not really oppressed for being short as much.
Yeah. I mean, like maybe there's like some social ramifications to it, but it's not that, again, like you're saying, it's not the tall person's fault that being tall is the ideal. Mm-hmm. Just like it's not the thin person's fault that being thin is the ideal.
And really the only way to move past all these societal, you know, norms is not to subvert them, but just to move past them. And those norms mostly being like, I don't know, like really when we're talking about like thin privilege, and also like we do enforce like gender roles a lot, which affects a lot of people who are trying to like pass as one gender or another. Like it's like you have to follow these strict rules or you're not like a true woman or a true man.
Yeah.
So again, in moving past that, if we like break down these gender roles, then the struggle around passing becomes less restrictive on a person.
Yeah. Well, and it can't be an all or nothing thing. Is that what you're getting at? It can't be like, you can't turn it completely on its head.
Right,
there has to be a level of balance. Because
you'll see this a lot in like with like blaxploitation stuff where they literally just made, you know, they just flipped it. And usually when you see like a movie, it's like a white knight sort of person taking on somebody clad in black, or like in like the case of a Western, you have like the white cowboy and a Native American. And in like blaxploitation, they kind of just flipped it and made like the people who were targets of violence the purveyors of violence themselves, and that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, it would be like if in an alternate reality white people had been enslaved instead of black people.
Yep, and there's like a show about that that like just came out recently, and it's like dumb. Like I hated watching it because it's like, no, like we can't tout oppression as like being the thing, you know, like.
Well, and there's all of that rhetoric, especially like on the alt-right, about like that's what all of these BLM protesters want. They want white people to be enslaved.
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not what we're calling for. We're asking for you to not murder us in the street.
We just trying to live.
Yeah, we're just trying to like not get killed for fucking using a counterfeit bill or some other stupid bullshit. Whatever it is. Like for stealing a candy bar, I shouldn't get murdered. That's all I'm fucking asking for.
Right. It's really about let people live and like care about people, but don't like force people to, you know, do anything they don't want to do, or be something that they're not.
Yeah, just like live and let live, dude.
Yep.
Don't be a dick.
I think the point is like anybody listening could probably feel like, oh yeah, there was a time that you felt rejected and it made you react in a way that, I don't know, that hurt you or hurt somebody else, like that self-censorship.
I think what this conversation has illuminated for me is that even though RSD by and large is like a thing that's specific to ADHD, like so many people, well, everybody to one degree or another experiences all of these things. And so unless you're a complete fucking sociopath, like you can empathize with somebody who's experiencing the more extreme end of it, like what many people with ADHD experience. Like you can empathize with it. You might not ever truly know or understand the severity that others might experience it to, but you can relate. And I think what it comes down to is talking about these things and talking about how prevalent they are, and the diversity of the way that we experience these things allows us to better understand each other and ourselves.
Right, yeah, the intersections of life.
We all know what it's like to be anxious. We don't all know what it's like to have a panic disorder, but you can empathize with somebody who has a panic disorder.
Right.
Yeah. And I think this is like also a really important thing to talk more about because of all of these studies that I'm pulling from, which again, all of those links will be in the show notes, but all of the ways that it can lead to a misdiagnosis or not being diagnosed at all. These are all things to be more aware of so that you can be more aware of them in yourself, but also in others, and potentially save yourself or somebody else from not being misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all. Because mental illness doesn't look the same in everybody.
Right.
Everybody with ADHD doesn't present symptoms the same way. Everybody with bipolar doesn't present symptoms the same way. Like what we're talking about with intersectionality and the way that we perceive race and gender, a lot of that does tie into the way that we perceive mental illness in others. Societally, we think we know what a drug addict looks like, in the same way that we think we know what mental illness looks like. It doesn't look the way that we necessarily think it does. Drug addiction doesn't always look like the homeless guy that sleeps outside of the bodega in your neighborhood. I often joke that Adderall is like white collar meth, because as much as I hate the stigmas around people who have to take stimulant medications because of their ADHD, there is a sliver of truth in that. Easy example, the obvious example being the way that crack cocaine and powder cocaine are criminalized differently in the United States. It's because of what we think of when we think of somebody who uses cocaine versus crack cocaine. Societally, someone who uses crack cocaine, you think of a lower socioeconomic positioning in society and probably a person of color, whereas cocaine is something that, like, I don't know, the fucking people that look like the dudes in Mad Men do.
Absolutely. There go them intersections.
Those intersections. But yeah, I want to just once again shout out Sad Boys for inspiring the topic of this episode. Anyway, I really enjoyed this one specific episode of Sad Boys that I got the idea for this episode from. But I'd recommend you listen to all of their episodes if you're interested. I think they're really similar to us in that they, at their core, are a mental health podcast, but tangents happen.
That they do.
That they do. But those are all of my thoughts about rejection sensitive dysphoria. Again, if you want to look more into it, I will link all of the sources that I used in the show notes.
I have a parting statement. Don't let time make you feel bad. Don't let anybody make you feel bad. If you feel bad, just stop feeling bad. That's it. That's it for me.
Easier said than done, but yeah, take that power away from other people.
No te lae bastardes carborundorum.
What is that? I took Latin for 3 years and I don't know what the fuck that is.
Don't let the bastards get you down.
Yeah, I like that. See, somehow when it's worded in like a more vulgar way, it like clicks with me a bit more.
Yeah, I got that from The Handmaid's Tale.
Oh, really? I've never watched that.
Well, I got it from the book.
Oh.
Because I read the book. I read the book twice. That's like, I hate reading, but
yeah, same.
That book slaps.
Yeah, same.
I think the book is like better than the show. I've only seen the first season of the show, but like the book is it's like, I don't know, it's like somehow creepier. even though like the show is very like dystopian and creepy, like I don't know, like the things that you don't know that are happening in the book, like because they allude to a lot of things. It's just it's like the like anxiety of like when you're worrying about something that like you don't even know if it's true or not. Like that's how that one works.
Yeah, and it's really difficult to pull that off in film. A book allows your imagination to fill in the gaps, and some of our imaginations are like fucked up, dude.
And like specifically for the show, they like show you all the things that like in the book you're like, is this true? Like, is this not? Like, what's actually going on? They just like show you everything.
Yeah. This is completely unrelated, but well, related to what we just said, but not related to the topic at large. That's what I like about older horror films. I don't know, like I think of a lot of like horror films from like the 60s and 70s. Like the one that comes to mind most prevalently is like Rosemary's Baby, when they didn't have like a lot of special effects and a lot of the capabilities that we have now, or any of the capabilities that we have now. Filmmakers had to be a lot more creative with how they created these like terrifying things because they didn't have like After Effects to just add it in post, you know? So they had to be more creative with how they created horror.
Also like morality during that time, like the 60s and kind of in the 70s, was like still pretty strict, even though like the Hays morality code had like died out maybe 10 years before. Hitchcock did Psycho in black and white so he could show blood. Like that was like one of the biggest reasons, other than like it being cheaper, because like people, they were saying like, oh, if you did this in color and it was in red, it would just be like upsetting to people.
I was afraid of horror films for so long. I only recently got over my fear of like horror movies, and I think it's because more modern horror movies, they're able to just like show you too much. They're not leaving as much to the imagination. They're more explicit with things because they can be, whereas in the 70s, when you didn't have special effects and you had to rely on practical effects, like those restrictions created an environment to where you had to get more subtle. There was more subtlety in the horror back then. What I love about Rosemary's Baby is that you never see anything truly horrifying throughout the whole movie, but you're so freaked out because you have no fucking idea what's going on.
The thing about it is like, I think like the public conversation around abortion was being brought up more, and so you have a woman who is like, you know, the devil is inside of her and she like can't get rid of it, like she has to carry it to term.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. Yeah, it's a bit of an analogy.
It actually, Jordan...
or is analogy the right word? But
I don't know if it's like a metaphor.
Or an allegory. Allegory, is that what it would be?
Yeah.
An allegory for the experience of not being able to get an abortion? Because I could see that.
Yeah, that was a big one, because it's like this thing inside of your body that you can't get rid of. And like Jordan Peele cites for Get Out, he cites his inspirations as being Rosemary's Baby and the Stepford Wives, which both deal with like identity. And like in Rosemary's Baby, you have like an identity in your body that you don't want,
and feeling trapped by it, and feeling like, yeah, you're trapped by this thing that the powers that be aren't allowing you to escape from.
And the Stepford Wives is like literally just like a horror of suburban life, in that like once you get married, you become a wife and a mother, and that's it.
Yeah. Having an unplanned pregnancy is one of my worst fears. It's not a fear that I think about very much anymore because I have an IUD, but before I had an IUD and I was just having to rely on myself to remember to take birth control every day, which bad fucking idea. If you are as scatterbrained as me or you have ADHD, probably shouldn't do an oral contraceptive. It's probably not a great idea, all right?
Might run into some problems there.
Just gonna throw that one out there. Yeah, but like before I got an IUD and I wasn't just like always covered, that was like one of my greatest fucking fears, was having an unplanned pregnancy. In high school, I used to have nightmares about getting pregnant.
Damn.
So Rosemary's Baby hits a little bit deeper than I thought it did. And not just because it is the story of my birth, but also. Actually, I'm not gonna like go into detail of this, but like not even as like the joke I just made, but like in a really real way, it is the story of my birth. But I'm not going to get into that. That's some like deep-seated childhood trauma that we don't need to talk about today.
Fair enough.
But I just had a small epiphany. Holy shit. Anyway, but yeah, I like the subtlety in that. Like, as much as I enjoy being able to create whatever I want for Pretty Girl Pill Club, sometimes having limitations on a project is kind of nice. Like when I get contracted to do a project by someone else and I have to kind of like do everything within the parameters that they've given me, I think sometimes those parameters do force me to get really creative with how I decide to do things and go about things. And I feel the same way about older films, like Dr. Sleep. I saw it, fucking hated it, but I love The Shining. Difference being, Dr. Sleep, well, and also because maybe a controversial opinion, but Stephen King was a way better writer when he was like addicted to cocaine. I mean, I'm happy that he's recovered, but I'm just gonna leave it there.
I heard like the issue people were taking with the film is like the idea of The Shining in The Shining is like a intangible thing.
Yeah, and so Dr. Sleep makes it a more explicit, tangible thing. So there's not as much room for you to kind of come to your own conclusions. Like, The Shining doesn't tell you things explicitly. Like, old horror films like that don't tell you things explicitly. A lot of questions are left unanswered, whereas like Dr. Sleep like kind of served it to you on a silver platter and was like, here are all of the answers to everything you ever wanted to know about The Shining. But it's way less interesting than the conclusions you came to on your own after watching The Shining. That movie also had terrible special effects that I fucking hated. Yeah, it's like, don't be so explicit with it. Like, don't spell everything out. And like, there was an over-reliance on special effects that like really took away from it. And like, the story really suffered because of it. And I don't know. Yeah, new horror films are not that interesting to me, except for, I can't remember the director's name, but the director that did Hereditary and Midsommar.
Ari Aster.
Yeah. Two fantastic movies that I love because the storytelling kind of operates in a way similarly to all of the older horror movies that I do really like, in that everything is really implicit and really subtle, and they don't answer all of your questions, and they leave everything up for interpretation. And like, even by the end of the movie, like when the big reveal happens, like the big reveal isn't even a big reveal because you still have no fucking idea what you were just watching for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I love that. Although the ending of Midsommar is the best ending to a movie I've seen in a really long time.
I think it's
Did
on
you watch
Prime.
that?
I haven't. It's on Prime though, so I might.
Oh my god, yeah. No, you should watch it. The ending is like incredible. It like, I got a really sick satisfaction from the ending. I don't know if that was the intention, but I feel like it might have been, and I really liked it. I don't want to like spoil it, but like every revenge fantasy you've ever had is going to be satisfied by that movie.
That sounds fun.
It's really fun. But that's all we've got for you today. We were also on another podcast recently called Water Cooler Talk, and our episode came out yesterday or the day before yesterday. I don't know. But when this episode comes out, it will be the newest episode of Water Cooler Talk. So when you get done listening to this, you should go listen to that and, you know, throw them a rating and review if you enjoy it. Go support them. We'll put all of the links in the show notes of this episode. But other than that, you can follow us on Instagram at Pretty Girl Pill Club and on Twitter at PGPC Pod, and also Public Notice LLC on Twitter, which is where you can get at Rohnie specifically.
Throw some beef my way.
Yeah, throw some beef his way. Dude, get into a Twitter fight. That could be fun. We're all a little bored, you guys. Like, give us something to do. Get into a fight with us. We're down. Not really. You could also just like say nice things. That would also be cool. You could also leave this show a rating and or review on iTunes, which would also be fucking cool. Or just like, you know, tell your friends about it. And as always, the full show notes with all of our links and sources will be on pgpcpod.com. But with all of that said, this has been the Pretty Girl Pill Club.
Take your meds.
And drink some fucking water, dude. Bye.
See ya.